taking a look at two additional papers that deal with annotated bibliography because my video got deleted. And I wanted to show these in relation to creating an annotated bibliography that really communicates something about your sources, that justifies them, and also cites them correctly. These next two examples, one's a pretty good one and one's not so good. I have changed names just so that we don't accuse anyone or don't get in trouble. But also because I can use them from students, donated from previous semesters. And I think they show things that might help our students. All the highlighting is mine. But if we're taking a look at this particular paper from Ted Nugent, his kind of boring title belies the fact that his paper is excellent. And he does all the formatting stuff that you need to do when you're dealing with sources. But his discussion of sources is right on target. The paper itself a little older, but I pulled it out because I use it in class a lot, and I thought, well, I ought to use it for online work as well. And this one comes from a former vet. Ted, not his real name, was a guy who'd come back from the theater of war and wanted to study what he was going through. So while this topic won't float everybody's boat, be thankful that I give you some freedom with your topic, it did for him. So let's take a look what he does. You might notice that he goes on a little bit longer than what I expect, but that's all right because every word counts for his particular paper. This is in the middle of the document, by the way, which is why we've got a page number that's a little bit further along than what you might expect. And I've changed his name. I should really change it to what it is, but I'm using a larger document. Oh, details. So if I do this, is it going to work? Yes, I think it is. Anyway, you get the idea. There's some people who are still not even doing that much. Peter Cadle's CQ researcher entitled Global Jihad gives a reassessment about the state of world terrorism. Cadle, a staff writer from CQR and Time and U.S. newspapers, profiles 13 different organizations, including Al-Qaeda, with their leaders, such as Ayman al-Zawahiri. You wouldn't believe it, but that guy's still around. So as much as we think all that's been taken care of, it has not. And they're still searching for him. And we'll have more trouble finding him now that we pulled out of Afghanistan. But anyway, they're looking for bin Laden's teacher, such as Ayman al-Zawahiri and a strategist. And these people that have or would like to attack the U.S. and its allies, or who have or who would like to attack the U.S. and its allies. Continuing on here. Written a decade after 9/11, the issue examines the enemies of the U.S. and their different groups beyond al-Qaeda working to mount an attack. I was surprised, this student writes, to see the reporting analysis of several dozen attacks around the world, some of which I hadn't heard about. What's surprising is once you get in on this topic, you discover that that ethnocentrism that serves us so well in some other areas isn't so good about finding out what's actually happening around the world, especially with people who hate us. And so my student's discovering why he was sent abroad and what else was happening while he was abroad. Cadle explores in detail the motivations, historical grievances, recruiting methods, activity, and the cultural conditions in such places as Saudi Arabia and Wahhabi Islam that inspire terrorists. Certainly not all Islam is in charge of terrorism, but there is a particular sect that has spawned more people than others. And so this isn't just a kind of poor treatment of religion. There's an actual historical aspect here and some facts that we can back this up with if you want to take a look at CQ Researcher. This isn't just bias. Cadle also has experts discuss how likely a future attack might be. How valuable would that be? And not just to a student who was a military person overseas. He says here in my highlighted red ending, the coverage and perspectives from experts make this a good source. Pretty straightforward. This is great. And he even tells me what that coverage is. I love it in a list. I love it when it's played out and tells me what it all means, which I think this profile does. Pretty good summary of what's in that source. Similarly, the article entitled International Experts Assess Dangers Still Posed by Al-Qaeda, which has different spellings, by the way, still shows a variety of perspectives on terrorism. German Der Spiegel, which is a famous daily, of course, and Americans may not know it, but Germans sure do, it interviews seven experts on terrorism and Al-Qaeda from all over, some of whom have been studying terrorism for most of their lives and who work for governments in the UK, Israel, Jordan, Singapore, significant terrorist targets. What's kind of interesting is that once we get out of our own kind of narrow silo or ken, our field of vision, we can see so much more is going on. And there's some people who've been spending their lives studying this stuff. I suppose if they have a bias, they just simply want to know more. That's not a bad bias to have. Each of these outsiders' perspectives outside of the U.S. assess how strong terrorist organizations are, as well as the growth and recruiting in terrorism. They evaluate how effective U.S. policy is and the probability of attack. This is also my highlighting. I noticed that there's at least one of the experts that must have been a source for CQR, since he's quoted there or in the Der Spiegel as well. Magnus Renstrup, an expert at the Center for Asymmetrical Threat Studies at the Swedish National Defense College, said, quote, even after 9/11, the West sometimes finds it difficult to understand al-Qaeda, and the West thinks linearly, the same way we used to always wage wars. Now, this was from the print source, which did have pagination, and notice that we've got a quote there that is pretty quotable. One of the things my students do is they'll quote all over. They'll use more source quoting than they will from their own writing. And it's taken to such a fault that sometimes I have students turning in papers that may have one or two sentences that are original to the student. I'm not grading your sources writing, I'm grading yours. And so you want to select out. Quotes are a little bit like salt. You use a little bit, and a little bit goes a long way. If you oversalt it, it's going to make the food taste terrible. And also, you want to know that it's quotable. And I think what he's got here is quotable. Even after 9/11, the West sometimes finds it difficult to understand al-Qaeda. We don't think right about our enemies. And maybe this is a source will help me think right. And maybe that's the larger criteria by which we're basing our judgment of sources. We think linearly, the same way we used to always wage wars, 5A. This reminded me, the student says, the vertical and lateral thinking of De Bono's Pebble Girl we read about in our Mayfield book. Now, this was from a student in class who was reading the print version of this, but this isn't a bad way to connect to the subjects that we're dealing with in class. I did provide the Pebble Girl as a supplement under content, but the idea is that she thinks outside of the box, and so too does a source try to think outside of the box about an issue that beleaguered us and continues to. The variety of informed expert opinion and coverage of the issue make this a good source. This is what this student's looking for. Look at this is derived from his two views of these two sources. And so he's going to tell me more about that. The two sources mostly confirm and complement. Complement not in terms of saying, oh, you're great looking today, but complement in the sense that they add to each other, like complementary angles, with a variety of expert opinion or bias. I made these good sources, which is what I wanted. I wanted to compare the opinions and backgrounds of the experts, and I got that in more common ground than I expected. Good sources will usually always agree about the facts that are there, and oftentimes about the opinions that are there, especially from experts. Common to each source was how difficult it is to determine the strength of terrorist cells. Common also to each was the goal of knowing your enemy. That is, which is what this is, the knowledge that action against radical jihadists requires an examination of what causes jihadism. You got to go back to root causes, these sources say. Not because you're trying to be overly sympathetic to people who want to kill you, but because, as he finishes out, jihadists are made, not born. They were once children themselves. How were they raised? What happened to make them who they are? That's what my student wanted to know. Ted really wanted to get in there and understand the psychology at work. Jihadists are made, not born, and as these sources indicate, it is cultural and family background that creates unrest in young men. This is just a great start for his topic. He has really left out so much of what he's read, but I can tell that he's really gotten into his subject. And not only that, he's able to quote pretty deftly in order to back up what he is saying. He doesn't use all quotes, he just chooses which ones seem appropriate. And doing something, too, that I don't require from students, trying to link it to class, which isn't a bad idea at all. At the end of his annotated bibliography, he's got his citations, which are correct as of when Ted did his thing. He's got a little boldface here, but that's all right. We can actually fix this. And he's even quoted the book, so I can help fix this. Everything's pretty much all right, even though we do tend to want to fix and make everything uniform so nothing's distracting. Take off the weird bold facing that's there, and everything looks right. Yeah, there we go. As of the time, this is just the way that you have it. Author, title information. You have the treatment, the formatting for each title getting a smaller unit in quotations, a larger unit in italics, just as I've talked about in another video. You have the date it was published, the pagination if you're given it. The fact that it's a web-based source, nowadays it'll actually include the container. There's information about containers out online, and I give an example of that. But anyway, also the date accessed, which of course is the date my student accessed it. All this pretty accurate. Good job, Ted. His annotated bibliography gives a lot. It tells me what he's looking for in his sources, why he's chosen the subject a little bit because it shows his enthusiasm for it, and it gets citation and indeed a little bit of quoting out of the way. He might use one quote or two quotes for the next paper, but it's not riddled with quotes, and it's not more quotes than actual writing. Now, that's my good example. Let's back up and take a look at one that's less good. I don't like to disparage students, and this one I've also kept anonymous, but I will sometimes, if I'm trying to make a point about how annotations or annotated bibliographies or papers generally fall flat. It isn't just because the heading's off or because we got a boring title here. The title itself is a topic that's very interesting, bullying, but what is the student going to say about it? Styles, bitchly. That's a name I just borrowed. But look what she says here. Using CQR is very easy to use. She's really talking about the database. She hasn't gotten into a specific article yet. She will soon. There are many different topics and also many ways to find recent and older topics. There are graphics. Well, a lot of sources will have graphics. What are good sources that have graphics? How do you know they're authoritative? When I was looking for a topic, I decided to choose a recent article. The article I read was called Preventing Bullying. Now there she's actually got the title. The author of the article is Thomas Bellardi. He is a very accomplished writer. Thomas has 2 degrees, one in English and one in journalism, which were both achieved at a major university. You know, what's funny is that I'll face students all day long who totally suspect anybody who has a degree or anybody like me who's trying to tell them what to do from an academic point of view. So why suddenly has it become a good thing to do to tell me that he's got an English degree? Why does that make him an authority on bullying? Do we know if he's been bullying or if he's reported on bullying before, if he was a bullier or was bullied? I don't know. That would be more applicable. His background just in journalism puts him in the ranks of all those people who have written and are journalists on this subject. So I don't know that that sets them apart. He's been published in many newspapers, important websites on bullying or not. I don't know. The author discusses the topic in many different ways, but when we don't see them, this one's not so good. He uses actual stories about bullying victims to prove his point along with other statistics. So here we'll get some stories. And we don't know whether these statistics are authoritative. And the author uses graphs and diagrams to show that research has been done. Was it his research? Do we know it's authoritative? I don't know. The biggest way the author dealt with bias is using credible research. Do we know it's only credible because he says so, or are there better reasons? In this case, we need to have something that explains why this is a better source, and this student's not giving it so far. We really haven't gotten into anything more specific about the source, except that it tells me that it has stories. The stories could be good or bad. It could be one story in the Naked City. We don't even know if they're representative stories. Second paragraph. I use EBSCOhost site to compare to CQ Researcher. Now notice we're not italicizing this, and in part we're not italicizing it because it's not a source itself. It's what I'm having you use. It's a database of sources. But this student hasn't gotten into it to take a look at the real source involved. I actually have it over here, which she's using, and I'll show you in a second. I use the EBSCO site to compare CQ Researcher. The site had a lot of smaller articles. She's evaluating the database, not the actual source. I looked at the same topic of bullying. All the articles were very biased, misspelled, on the author's opinion. We're talking about too many. I need to see, what we're taking a look at, because opinions are neither good or bad. They could be good, they could be bad, depending on how informed you are about the subject. There's a great source I could have recommended for this student had I caught her in time that actually profiled all of Anoka and how Anoka School District had dealt with bullying. Now, there were some opinionated pieces in there, but they were opinions based on real experience. That doesn't make it a bad source. Anyway, I couldn't help her with that, and here we don't even get that close to it. There wasn't much research or graphs to support, I think she says, the opinion given. The website I would use is something to look up quick, but not to do much research on, because the articles were so short and didn't have much background or research to make it concrete. Overall, I thought that CQ, which again needs that italicization because it's a larger source, has more statistics to back it up. The student has sort of told me about that second source a little bit, but it's not enough. And she does give me a concluding paragraph about what makes for good sources on bullying. Let me cut to the chase. There's no one who's going to be in favor of bullying. That's not the bias that we're looking for. So I don't know what this opinion that she's talking about in the second source has to do with at all. The most vile people who are bullies themselves might write something, but their non-reality based sources probably won't be considered at all as any kind of useful source, except as a negative sort of source. And here I'm thinking about particular people who are bullies themselves. Anyway, I don't know. This second example of a paper is so much less. I think you can agree that it gives so much less than Ted Nugent. The first paper, Styles Bitchley, hasn't really gotten into the topic or sunk through the thicket to try and get to the ground and understand what's actually gone on with that second and first source. What makes for a good source on bullying? There's no one going to be in favor of bullying. So what makes for good sources? Is it stories about victims? Isn't that it? I would assume that we'd want authoritative stories about victims, real victims, not just people who are complainers or think they're themselves victims. And do we find that in the second source? I don't know. I just don't know. There's some opinions, but I don't know. When this was turned in with the wrong title, bib, which kind of picky uni, but if somebody else sees a paper that you turn in and it's supposed to have a bibliography, it's not right. Follow the directions. You got works cited. And if you're doing it for APA, which you've cleared with me ahead of time because that's what I asked for, you give APA style, which is references. And there are a couple of others. Maybe you want to practice with me, but I've asked for works cited, so that's what I'm going to ask you to do. Works cited. And these are wrong. These are the URLs. I can't click on these, even though they're highlighted. That won't actually take me to the link because it'll introduce me to the firewall of the library. These are sources that are stuck behind them. And even though I've searched this one on EBSCO, the actual source itself, I can point out here, right, is from BMC Psychiatry. I looked it up so I could take a look at it. BMC Psychiatry. And that's the source, a print source gone online. Right? What the student hasn't done is what I've recommended in other settings where you go over, let me move my stuff around, and you cite the source, you draw up this little screen. Look for the other videos that show you how to do this because it will fix things, and then you can not only recognize what makes for a full citation, but you can get it right and make sure that you can tidy it up and it looks just like it should look. This one, 2021, let's copy. And you'd be surprised at how I could look this up. I'm really just looking up a source I'm bullying that I thought might work for this. I'm going to stick it in since she was so vague about the actual source. We'll paste it in. You can see how it needs to be fixed up, and since I'm doing overkill here anyway, let me fix it up and profile how this is different. We take the eraser, erase it up. We put it in the same font that the other ones are in. You can change it back if you like, Times New Roman, that'll work. Then we do the double space paragraphing. You do the hanging indent. Now, even EasyBib will make you do the finer points, so why not just learn how to do it with your editor? It'll get you through the tough spots, and you'll be ready in future classes just to do it right from the get-go yourself. As I do this rather boring, tedious task, and show you how to do it, and make sure that you get it right. Latin's always italicized, kind of useful to know. Et al. Means and others. There are other authors to this piece. Don't forget we got to get our title squeezed in here as italics, so that's our second title. We have the basic pieces. Author, in this case authors, title, smaller units, larger units, the volume number, which in this case happens to represent a paginated journal, right, pages 1 through 10. The fact that it's given in the container EBSCO host, which is where we find it, that seems like it's given in here, but that is not enough. Remember, sources of authors, as you've told me, as we pointed out in previous videos, and it's not enough to just list this URL. It's too messy. And it has a document number, which sometimes professional journals will have. And that's the way that we know that we have the exact issue that we're supposed to be taking a look at. You can see the difference, can't you? This one just hasn't done the job. And I know this student might otherwise be a very good student styles, but she's not gotten into the assignment. She thought it was something else. She just hasn't done the work. And so what I want you to do is do the work. Show me that you can do it. If it's that easy, show me that you know how to do it. No problem. I'm looking forward to your annotated bibs turned in. See you soon.